Hello class and welcome back to Sketch Science. Today we're talking about small bodies in space. No, I'm not talking about bodies like people, actual bodies or animals or anything. We're not talking about that in space. That's a completely different topic. Today we are actually talking about bodies in space like asteroids, dwarf planets, moons, comets, smaller objects than planets, stars, any of that. What are these small things in space? What does the terms mean? Now, there are a few different small bodies in space. One of them, like we said before, are moons. Now, we have a moon around Earth. Our moon orbits the Earth. It doesn't orbit the sun, it goes around us. A moon is an object that orbits a planet. It doesn't orbit the sun, it orbits a planet. They orbit larger bodies. Even dwarf planets could have moons. Moons are just an object in space that orbit larger bodies, but not the sun. So if you think about it, if the sun were here, if we went around the sun in this shape, well, a moon would go around us. That is the idea of a moon. It's an object in space that orbits a larger body, but not the sun. It's a solid object. Don't get it confused for a satellite because they are much larger. They're caught in the gravity of the larger bodies that they orbit around. It's not always circular. Like our moon may be circular. It may look more like a ball, but some aren't. Some are just like kind of big asteroids that go around other planets. That's what a moon is. It's a smaller body that orbits a larger body that isn't a sun or a star. Now the second one we're going over is a dwarf planet. Now, what is a dwarf planet? Well, we have 5 of them in our solar system, including Pluto. No, Pluto's not a planet anymore. It was a planet for so long, and then we just kind of got tired of it, so we removed it. No, we removed it because it was too small. They orbit the sun. They're large enough to be roughly spherical, but they have not cleared their orbit of larger objects. So, they are larger objects. They orbit the sun, but have they cleared the neighborhood? And the answer to that is no. They have not cleared the neighborhood, which means as they fly through their orbits, they bump into other things. There's other things in their way. They run into them. They haven't cleared it. Earth, if you notice, we don't run into giant space rocks every year. We don't. We don't just constantly bump into things. Pluto does. Pluto bumps into a lot of things because it's out in space pretty far away. It's slowly moving around out there, going, just having its own time. But they run into asteroids, they run into other dwarf planets. They haven't cleared out their orbit path. They are not the only thing in their own path. So that's why things are considered dwarf planets. They're not considered full planets. It's because, yes, they're large enough they could be. They might be spherical, but they haven't cleared their neighborhood. The third one we want to go over is a comet. Now, a comet is a small body of ice, rock, and dust. Ice, rock, and dust. That's what comets are made of. It's a clump of these things out in space that they go highly elliptical orbits around the sun. So they're not your normal planet orbits. They're very rubber bandy. They kind of, if this is the sun, they take a shot past and then way out. They do not have our normal circular orbit. It's kind of like a slingshot. And as they come in and around the sun, they have a tail because as you get closer to the sun, that ice and dust melt off and it looks like a tail. The cool thing about it, though, is tails always face away from the sun. So if the comet was here and it was moving this way, the tail would come out the back. Makes sense. You're moving towards the sun, and the tail would be going behind you, right? Well, if it was right here, remember, it's still moving that way. It's still going that direction around the sun, but now the tail's facing this way. The tail's in front of it because the tail of a comet always faces away from the sun. That's how it works, because as it melts off the sun, the force pushes it out into space. Because remember, in space there's no friction. That's why the tail doesn't always fall behind it. In space, the energy from the sun is just pushing it away. Now, the fourth object we want to go over today is an asteroid. I'm sure many of you have heard of an asteroid. Asteroids are small, irregularly shaped rocky objects. So, small, irregular objects. So what does that mean? They're rocky too. That means that instead of your normal planet, dwarf planet, any of that, where you're usually in a spherical shape, dwarf planets aren't always. Dwarf planets can be weird shapes too. It's all about size with dwarf planets. But with asteroids, it's usually a smaller, randomly shaped rock floating out in space. Now, they could be the size of a car to several kilometers or miles across. So think about it. You could have a Toyota Prius floating out in space. That would be an asteroid. Well, if it was just a rock. A Toyota Prius floating out in space would be more of a satellite than an asteroid because it's not made of rock. But you get the idea. A small car could be the size of an asteroid, or it could be the size of a shopping mall. It could be the size of plenty of different things. They can be anywhere from very big to very small. But they are irregular and rocky shaped. They're not spherical like most bodies in the solar system are. Now, some travel through space in elliptical orbits like a comet, but they don't have that ice and dust, so instead of leaving the trail, they just kind of float around in a certain shape around us. They cross the orbits, these asteroids cross the orbits of Earth, of other planets, because of their strange orbit. Yes, we have an asteroid belt, so if you're looking at the asteroid belt, here's the Sun, here's Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, and then a bunch of asteroids out here. We have a belt of these rocks all going around past Mars, but there are also asteroids that sometimes float around inside in random points. Now finally, the last one we're going over is meteorites, or meteoroids. Now meteoroids are small, rocky, or metallic bodies. What does that mean? What does a small, rocky, or metallic body mean? Well, it's a small object floating out in space that's made of either rock or metal. Now, they may be debris left over from when the solar system formed. They could also break off of comets or asteroids, but the reason it's called a meteoroid is because often they become meteors. They're not asteroids. They're too small to be asteroids. They're more of just pieces. Asteroids kind of have their own orbits. Meteoroids don't. They're just kind of floating out in space. Now, when it enters an atmosphere, so when a meteoroid enters an atmosphere, it becomes a meteor. A meteor is just a meteoroid that enters the atmosphere. So if you think about it, those little shooting stars you might see, or a meteor shower, those are all these little meteoroids floating out in space that all enter our atmosphere and they burn up from the friction before they can fall down to Earth. Sometimes they might reach the Earth, and at that point, if they do hit the ground, they're actually called a meteorite. A meteorite is a meteor that lands on the surface. So they go meteoroid out in space, meteor when they enter an atmosphere, and meteorite if they land. Very few actually become meteorites because most burn up before they have a chance to touch the ground. Now we've gone over a few different items. If we wanted to compare size of these items, you would have moons here. Dwarf planets would be a little bit smaller, or they can be about the same size as a moon. Your comets are usually a little bit smaller, and they have that tail coming off. Your asteroids are also smaller, much like your comets. Let's make it a little more irregular. And then your meteoroids are real small. Now that's the size of smaller objects in the solar system. If you were to compare them to planets, our planets range very drastically in size. If you think about it, Mercury is fairly small. Then you have Venus, which is kind of close to Earth. They're similar in size. Then you have Mars, which is also a little bit smaller. But then as soon as you get outside the asteroid belt, you have the gas giants, huge bodies of gas floating out in space. That's due to the temperature of the sun. That's why that goes out there. But if you think about it, planets range very into all different sizes. It's the same with all of these objects. Dwarf planets, they're kind of in a range, but they can be different sizes. Moons can be all different sizes. Comets can be different sizes. Asteroids, meteors. This is just an example, a scale for you to look at in terms of how they kind of look. Moons go around planets. Dwarf planets do go around the sun, but they have not cleared their neighborhood. Comets are balls of ice, dust, and rock that have a very extreme elliptical orbit that have a tail due to the ice and dust melting off of it. Asteroids are small, irregular shaped rocky objects floating out with an orbit, and meteoroids are small pieces of rock or metal that float around planets and occasionally fall into the atmosphere and become meteors. Now, if there's any more information you'd like, or if there's any questions you have, please don't be afraid to leave a comment. Also, remember to like the video so you can come back to it a lot easier. You can just go to your liked video tabs, find the video, come right back to it, or subscribe so you can find the channel easier and get back to this video if you ever need to watch it again. Remember, comment, like, subscribe. All these things not only help me, but they help you. If you remember these things, you take care of them, and learn something, please be sure to come back, and I will see you next time.